All right. Yeah. Okay, full disclosure, just in case. Normally I over-prepare by a long shot for Wednesday nights, and I have much left, and that's great. But I'll be out of town all next week. Me and the boys are going, and Ari are going somewhere. And so I'm having to prepare the sermon for this week and for next week, this week, and next week's sermon is Easter. And so those are requiring a lot of time. So I'm relying mostly on what I had done research already, which I think will be enough. Normally because normally we don't cover nearly as much as I think we cover. We will, and if you've been here for 2 weeks, then you know that's the case, that I say we're going to get through this today, and then 4 weeks later we finally get through it. So it shouldn't be an issue, but just in case, you know. Okay, Numbers chapter 20, starting in verse, let's start in verse 2. So at this point in Numbers, to catch you up, they have sent the spies in to Canaan. The spies came back. 10 of them said, they're too big, we can't do it. 2 of them, Caleb and then later Joshua, said, we can do it, God's on our side. The people listened to the 10 as opposed to the 2, and because of that, they have to wander in the desert for 38 more years until that whole generation over 20 years old dies. None of them will go into Canaan. Okay, verse 2. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. Sound familiar? And the people quarreled with Moses and said, would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink. Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. Again, very similar to what we read last week. It's happened over and over and over. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord said to Moses, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them and give drink to the congregation and their cattle. And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where people of Israel quarrel with the Lord, and through them he showed himself holy. So, this is when Moses and Aaron earn their staying out of the promised land. So as far as we know up till now, it'll be this generation, and it'll be Moses and Aaron leading them into Canaan, into the promised land. God tells Moses, Moses comes again, people are whining and complaining and grumbling. Moses comes to God, God says, take your staff with you, speak to the rock, tell the rock to produce water, and it will produce water. Moses goes out with his staff. Instead of speaking to the rock, strikes the rock twice, which is the way that God had told him to do it earlier, interestingly. But strikes the rock twice, and water comes out, etc. And then because of that, God says, you will not be going into Canaan, into the land I will give them. And precisely it says, verse 12, again, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me, or because of your unbelief, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, you shall not bring this assembly. Thoughts on that? Unbelief how? How are they showing unbelief? What did they do that was worthy of punishment? Any thoughts on those things?
I always thought that was a little harsh. Like, really?
Yeah, right. That's good.
Why not give him another chance?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a natural reaction, I think. Maybe. Yeah, it could have been. What else?
He knows their heart, right? He can search their heart.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. There seems to me a lot of a parallel here with, remember when we talked about Nadab and Abihu, and about, the man who held the ark? Uzzah. Because with the same sort of language used, where it says, it's using the idea of God's holiness again, right? Verse 12. because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel. Right? There's a matter of God's holiness here, just like there was there. And in both cases, we think, well, that's kind of harsh. And I think it's meant to be that way. We're supposed to respond that way. Say, that's kind of rough. But realize that the holiness of God is worth that sort of roughness. The holiness of God is a bigger deal than we think it is, right? Nadab and Abihu offer strange, whatever that word is, sacrifices, and they are killed because of it. Uzzah puts his hand out to brace the ark, and he is killed because of it. There's a sense in which Moses has shown a lot of grace here, where instead of doing what he did to the others, God says, you're not going to die today, but you will die before you go into the promised land.
And also as a leader, you think Moses is held to a stricter standard.
Yeah, that's a clear New Testament teaching as well, right? That those who are teachers are held to a higher judicial standard for sure. Yeah, that's a good point too. Any other thoughts on that? It's interesting. One commentator said, well, let me ask this first. It's interesting that it says that what they didn't uphold God's name as holy. Right, that's an interesting thing. Right, that's what he says. That their action didn't uphold God's name or present God as holy. Didn't present God as holy. And that was part of their unbelief. That's an interesting phrase. What exactly that means is we don't know for sure. But one commentator that I liked said that what we have here is very similar to Jonah in that God just tells him to go feed the people. They're thirsty. Go give them water. Speak to the rock and it will produce it. And Moses was not in the mood for mercy in the same way Jonah was not in the mood for mercy when it came to the people. Moses was sick of these people. And so instead of just, it says, go to speak to the rock. Moses instead goes out, and here's what he says. Hear now, you rebels. Shall we bring forth water from you from the rock? I think we sort of have two lines of sin there. One where it's obviously he's working out of anger, and so in that sense doesn't uphold God's name as holy. Right? God is not the one that is just the provider. He is now the one that's lashing out in anger. Right? So there's a sense in which that is there. Also, it is, are we to bring you out water? Right? So it's Moses saying, am I to bring you out water? And it's not God getting the credit, which Moses had been so good at, right? It's so good at throughout his life of getting God the credit and not taking credit himself. But we have a lapse of that humility here, it seems, where Moses says, fine, we'll do it again, you rebels, you idiots. We'll do it again for you because you can't figure it out, and he hits the rock. And so we have this moment of not upholding God's holiness by him not just going out to the rock and speaking in some sense emotionless to the rock, but instead in anger at the people, dishonoring God's name by striking the rock instead of following what God had told him to do. So I think that's probably some truth there, that in the same way that Jonah didn't want to preach to Nineveh because he knew that God was merciful and he wasn't in the mood for mercy for these people who had done him so harm, Moses was not in the mood to show these people much kindness and mercy because they were, again, I mean, it's astonishing, right? We read this again as we have so many times and we think, goodness gracious. Like you think, didn't we already read that passage? No, it's just happened 11 times before this, right? Where the people are complaining and grumbling. Like surely if we're tired of it, Moses was tired of it. And he expresses that in a way that is expressing unbelief and dishonoring God, not treating him as holy and doing the way what he had called him to do. For whatever reason it is, at the end of this little story, for whatever reason it is, what we have at the end of this story is us realizing for sure we need a better Moses, right? We're seeing this a lot in the book of Hebrews. We're going to see it again this coming week, that the theme is we need a better king than David. We need a better prophet than the prophets of the Old Testament. We need a better firstborn than Israel. And already, as we're reading this story, Moses has done pretty good, right? He's had some mistakes, he's had some flaws. But we see once and for all, okay, Moses is not even going to lead them into the promised land. We need a better Moses. We need a better mediator. We need a better leader who's not going to lose his emotions on us even when we deserve it, right? Who's not going to act in a way that disregards God as holy even when we deserve it. So the longing for a better Moses, a better mediator. Any final thoughts on that?
More of a secular perspective, I guess, but he was saying that in a place of leadership like Moses was, it's not good practice to use force.
Yeah, that's good.
And Moses used force instead of speaking, and basically
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah, that's good. And we talked about in the beginning of Hebrews long ago, many times God spoke to us by the prophets, that God has always been a God that acts primarily by speaking. Right? That God, we don't have God forming things as much as He does. He speaks them into existence, and there's a connection there probably as well. Yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts on that?
You would assume that Moses not using the gift from God to get water out of the rock in the correct way, you would think that water just wouldn't come out.
Yeah, it still came out. That's a good point. So that's good. Any thoughts on that? Why does water still come out? Why doesn't water not come out? And again, I'll say it again just for emphasis. When I ask questions, it's almost never do I have the answer in mind. It's not an objective thing. We're just talking. Any thoughts on that? Why do you think the water still came out? Why not just keep the water from the people?
Their faith was already weak. He didn't want it to be weaker.
Yeah, so preserving the faith of the people? Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And I don't know if that's the answer.
I don't either, but it's a good one. Other thoughts?
He still provides for us when we mess up.
Yeah, that's good. Right. So even when we screw it up, God's still going to provide. Right? The sun's still going to rise tomorrow, even if you just mess it up bad the rest of the day. Yeah, there's still that sort of natural grace. Yeah, that's good. That's good too. There's a verse. Today. 1 Timothy 2. I think it's 1 Timothy 2. That says, when we are faithless, God remains faithful. Right? That when we are faithless, God remains faithful. Even in our moments of weakness, God is still faithful. God will not fail us even when we fail Him. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Any other thoughts? Look, we haven't focused a lot on that. We saw it with the golden calf a bit, but Aaron was beloved by the people in a way that Moses wasn't. It seemed like Aaron was much more relationally connected to the people than Moses was. Moses was kind of transcendent above the people. Aaron was with the people, was cared for deeply by the people, and Aaron's death seems to have a bigger impact on the people than Moses's, which is interesting. Aaron, of course, as the high priest, so there is this sort of mediating action where he is standing between God and the people, and obviously that's pointing to Christ. Anyway, look at verse 24. Let Aaron be gathered to his people, which is a Jewish way of saying that he'll die and go to his people. Let Aaron be gathered to his people, which had a dual meaning, by the way. It meant gathered to his people spiritually, but also your bones would be buried with your family's bones in the same tomb. So there's a dual meaning there. For he shall not enter the land that I have given to the people of Israel, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them on Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and shall die there. Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. And when all the congregation saw that Aaron had perished, all the house of Israel wept for Aaron for 30 days. So we have this beloved high priest, the intercessor, literally the sacrificer, but the sacrificer, the priest, the intercessor that couldn't finish the job because of death. We have this intercessor, this priest, this high priest, really that for two reasons. Because of his sin at Meribah and because of his mortality, which are of course tied together. But because of his sin and his mortality, he couldn't be the priest that we need, right? Because he's sinful himself. And even if he's good all his life, he still dies. In our passage for Sunday in Hebrews 1 or Hebrews 2, it talks about Christ defeating the thing that's been defeating mankind from the beginning, which is death. That death has reigned, has ruled over us since Eden. That even take the best men that ever lived and all their best moments, if they lived those lives in just best moments, at the end of their lives, they still die. Even the best man who's ever lived outside of Christ. Even Christ in his human form, but even the best man who ever lived, and the best king that ever reigned, his reign will only last so long because he died. And we see this already as Aaron's son is going up the mountain with him. And then Aaron does not come back down, but Eleazar comes down, and the Aaronic priesthood is passed down from the first time from one generation to the next to Eleazar his son. And of course, it will be passed down more and more and more as the generations come. It was a great disappointment. And it's again the same sort of thing where the people are seeing very clearly the imperfection of the priesthood, right? That the priesthood was not enough. The priesthood couldn't do it. And Aaron was probably the best of them, right? Of all the high priests, Aaron was probably the best of those high priests that came after him. Certainly, if not the best, one of the best high priests. It definitely wouldn't rise higher than Aaron. And even Aaron died. Even Aaron failed because of sin. Okay, look at Hebrews chapter 7. So flip to our series book, New Testament, Hebrews chapter 7. I am thoroughly enjoying studying Hebrews. It's been a blast. I'm very looking forward to Sunday. The passage Sunday, I think, unless you've been studying the Bible for a while, even then, I think we'll read it, and then I will spend the rest of the morning explaining why it's not what you think it is, which is fun, because that's what happened to me, realizing that it wasn't what I thought it was. And so there's maybe a little appetizer. It's gonna be fun. I like that kind of stuff, where I go into a text thinking it means one thing and realize it doesn't mean that at all. That's fun. Okay, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 23. So Aaron dies, Aaron sins, and because of that can't go into the promised land, and Aaron dies and can no longer be with the people of God. Verse 22. Verse 21. But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Verse 23. The former priests were many in number. Why? Because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But Jesus holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. So we see in Numbers already that the priesthood is not going to be enough to actually cleanse us. Right? They're going to go in and offer sacrifices, and they're going to keep having to offer sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice, because no sacrifice is going to be enough. And then that high priest will die, and we'll have to have another high priest, because that high priest had his own sin and would not live forever. So Hebrews 7, the writer of Hebrews, whoever it is, makes the point that Christ is the better high priest because he had neither one of these things, because he was not filled with sin. And of course, he would not end his high priesthood by dying, but instead he lives forever and continues forever as our priest, having offered not continual sacrifices, but the one sacrifice for sin. So unlike Aaron, who has this moment of death and is no longer there ever again for the people of God, Christ remains forever as the eternal high priest. Unlike Aaron, who failed and because of his failure wasn't able to lead the people in the promised land, Christ never failed once and so led his people into the ultimate promised land. Thoughts on that as we turn back to Numbers 21 for the next part, but thoughts on that as we're turning. Any thoughts on that? Aaron dies. So we see in the first part we looked at tonight that we need a better Moses. That's made clear to us. We need a better Moses. Moses wasn't enough. And now the reader gets to the next part of the chapter and sees, goodness, we need a better Aaron too. Not only do we need a better mediator, we need a better high priest. Not only do we need a better leader, we need a better sacrificer. The Jews feeling this need as history is rolling forward and having no idea that all that's going to come in one individual. That we're going to get the better mediator, the better leader, the better sacrificer, the better high priest, the better king, the better everything, all wrapped up in Jesus. Numbers 21. Numbers 21. Any thoughts on that before we press on? Okay, Numbers 21, very interesting section. Okay, so they're leaving where they just were, where Aaron's death was. From Mount Or, they set out by the way of to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the people became impatient on the way. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. I mean, again, right? It was last chapter. Here we are again. The people spoke against God and against Moses, verse 5. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there's no food and no water, and we loathe this worthless food. I love that contradiction, where they contradict themselves. There's no food and no water, and we hate that food. Isn't that the most childish thing? That's the definition of a child, where the child says, there's nothing to eat. Well, there's a plate full in front of them, right? And you say, eat that, and I don't want to eat that. Well, then you're not hungry, right? How many times? I'm starving. Well, if you're starving, you'll eat that, right? Whatever it is in front of you. A little bit ago, it was lasagna, right? Eat the lasagna. There's nothing to eat. Look at the plate in front of you. And the Israelites are the same way. Children. God said, I'm literally providing manna for you every day. I gave you quail till it came out your nose. And they said, there's nothing to eat. And by the way, I hate that eating food. There's no food. And by the way, I don't like that food that's right there in front of me. It's wonderful. Verse 6. Then the Lord sent fiery serpents, which is not in all likelihood a reference to them being on fire, but that their bites were fiery, right? So that they were painful, fiery bites. Fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many people of Israel died. And the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord so he would take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Okay, stop there. Okay, so honest question. Again, this is one of those questions. Why did God send the snakes? Why did he send the snakes? There's several possible answers. Any thoughts? Why? Why did we do this? Why not just say, you bunch of fools? Why the snakes? Why send? Thoughts?
Is the snake means betrayal?
Yeah, there's certainly probably some, there's imagery there, like why choose a snake? Why not? He could have sent lions. He could have sent bears. Oh my. But he sends snakes. Yeah, there's probably some imagery there, and we see that the snake being betrayal, and that in the same way that in my mind the clearest kind of imagery is that in the garden, of course, the snake convinced the people to doubt God's provision. Right? Did God really say? And then it's God's trying to keep from you knowledge, right? God's trying to keep things from you. That's what the Garden of Eden was about, right? Satan convinced the people that God was keeping things from them, not providing fully as he should. And it's the same thing here, right? They're not convinced God is providing. It's the same thing. And so we have serpents again as punishment. Yeah, I think that's probably good relevance. What else? Yeah, maybe so. That's great. Yeah, that's great, Miss Sabrina. Yeah, I think we lose that idea of the fear of the Lord in the modern day. That it's actually a good thing. That for them to go fearfully back to the Lord, to say, I don't know if there's a snake under my bed, but I'm going to pray again. God, you've got to come do something. Yeah, that's to put the fear. You're getting ahead of me, David. But let's go ahead and go there. No, that's perfect. No, that's great. That's great. You're exactly right. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Anyway,
You're exactly right.
you look upon the serpent, you're going to be healed, and same with Jesus.
Yeah. John 3:14, 2 verses before the most famous verse in the Bible for good reason. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Why that metaphor, right? Tons of things are lifted up. Why the serpent? So must the Son of Man be lifted up. And this is Jesus speaking, right? That whoever believes in him may have eternal life. So imagine Christ, who was there, right? Thinking back on this moment, knowing it was really about him, watching it happen, thinking they're not going to believe what this is actually about. And here he says, in the same way that Moses lifted up the bronze serpent, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. In Numbers, that whoever looks on the snake will live. That whoever believes in the Son would have eternal life. And there's, like Chance is saying, there's direct parallel. Those who looked upon the snake, looked upon their evil, stared their evil in the face, admitted their evil, and bowed before God, which is what all that, right? You're seeing your own sin. Those who looked upon the Son, those who believe in the Son, in the same way, are saved. And then, of course, verse 16, which you didn't have little divisions when the letters were written. So, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Yeah, there is a direct parallel with what's happening here with the snakes and the snake on the pole to what we do with Christ. Rhetorical question, just to kind of take a tangent. God could have just got rid of all the snakes, right? He could have done that. Of course he could have. Now, rhetorical, that means don't answer it, Troy. I know you grew up in Alexandria. He's sitting, so I'll run after church. Rhetorical question being this: why doesn't God just get rid of the snakes? Okay, what is the reason for that? Why doesn't God just get rid of the snakes? And here's it seems to me the clearest answer. Of course, it's pointing forward to Christ, right? So it's because of the typology. It's because of the foreshadowing. All that stuff is true. It's because he knew that when God said the words to do it, he knew that he'd be the one doing it in ultimate form. But also, like we've been talking about, like Miss Susan just referenced, it's because God's goal, the highest goal, was not just to get rid of the snakes. Right? That wasn't the goal. He could have accomplished that like that. Just like God's goal wasn't just to conquer Canaan. He could have done that. Conquered. Going in. Walk in. You don't need to march around any walls. You don't need to go to battle. Just go. You don't have any faith. Just walk. He could have done that. He could have just said, snakes are gone. But he doesn't do that. Right? Because here's this it's just such a profound truth that if we can hold on to, it will make everything a lot easier for us. Connects to everything else. Because the biggest problem in that village wasn't the snakes. Right? In a village full of poisonous snakes, the biggest problem wasn't the snakes. The biggest problem was the faithless people.